Hi everybody, my name's Dustin Ducharme. I'm a school psychologist from Georgia State University, and today I'm going to be doing a brief introduction to adventure therapy and Outward Bound. And the reason that I wanted to talk about adventure therapy today is that I've begun working in the field, and I've been working as a co-facilitator in some small group adventure therapy settings, and hadn't really been exposed to the area a lot outside of kind of general counseling techniques, and was curious to learn a little bit more about the field. So the origin of adventure therapy can be traced back to the late 1800s, when one of the first summer camps in the United States was established in New Hampshire. Camp Shakura was established on Burt Island on Squam Lake in 1881 by Ernest Balch. And as a brief aside, I grew up in Candia, New Hampshire, which is about an hour south of Squam Lake. Been there on many a field trip, so it was cool to kind of feel like I was connected to adventure therapy from the roots in some way. So Ernest Balch was born and raised in New Hampshire, and went on to attend Dartmouth College. And while in college, Balch was appalled by the behavior of his wealthy schoolmates. So, as a method of preventing the moral destitution that Balch perceived in his peers, he developed summer camps to combat, and I quote, the miserable existence of wealthy adolescent boys in the summer when they fall prey to the evils of life in high society. And the drawing above is a printing of some boys from Camp Shakura at Chapel from the New Hampshire Monitor in 1886. So early summer camps like Camp Shakura weren't staffed by clinicians, and they didn't specifically serve the purpose of therapy. But still, this was kind of the beginning of the theories that would end up shaping purposeful camping and set the foundation for adventure therapy. So, one of the first therapeutic camps developed specifically for emotionally challenged young people was called Camp Ramapo, founded in 1922 in upstate New York. The camp opened with the intention of working to improve young men's personality and behavioral problems. So this was the first time that the camps shifted to focus on a strictly kind of clinical population. Camp Wadiko in New Hampshire and Camp Wawoki in New York were founded shortly afterwards and maintained a similar structure that focused on kind of developing moral fiber and outdoor skills, much like the earlier camps did. But these ones were unique in that now they were focusing only on a clinical population. So these new camps were staffed by psychiatrists, social workers, and psychologists, as well as outdoors people. And Ramapo in particular is notable because it's the longest running therapeutic camp in the United States, and it's been staffed with mental health professionals since it opened its doors. Each year, Camp Ramapo welcomes about 500 students at their summer camp, and then works with about 12,000 more on adventure-based retreats kind of throughout the country. So, a name that folks are probably peripherally familiar with is Outward Bound. So, Outward Bound came to the United States in 1962 and has had a pretty profound effect on the field of adventure therapy. Outward Bound was developed by Kurt Hahn, an educational philosopher from Germany who founded his first outdoor schools in Germany in the 1930s. And the original principles of the Outward Bound Charter were similar to those of previous camps, meaning that they focused on kind of character training and development of outdoor skills. The clinical nature of Outward Bound and more broadly of outdoor programs in general, started to gain a little bit more popularity in kind of the mid 1960s, and in 1966 it was kind of the first experimentation to see if these outdoor programs were an effective way to kind of modify behavior. So in 1966, 60 delinquent youth were enrolled in the Massachusetts chapter of Outward Bound to see if the experience would lead to less recidivism or less of a tendency of a criminal to reoffend. So they compared a bunch of juvenile delinquents in the Outward Bound group to juvenile delinquents that did not participate in Outward Bound. So the experiment was deemed a general success, with only 20% of the Outward Bound group reoffending compared to 37% of the control group. So this marks the beginning of the clinical nature of Outward Bound. But the interesting thing is, at this point, the staff still weren't mental health professionals. This was still just kind of adventure staff. And it was also with not necessarily a clinical population, but more of a juvenile delinquent population. The first documentation of Outward Bound being used for a strictly clinical population was in 1975 at the Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center in Hanover, New Hampshire. So this is the first instance of a fully Outward Bound staff with psychologists, doctors, and social workers. So now I'm going to kind of move into some of the roots of adventure therapy and talk a bit about the kind of the psychological underpinnings that support the practice. So the underlying philosophy of adventure therapy is one of experimental education and the integration of traditional therapeutic methods in a skill-building setting of exploration. And in exemplifying this idea, John Dewey stated that the goal of education is in establishing conditions that arouse curiosity, strengthen initiative, and set desires and purposes that are sufficiently intense to carry a person over the dead places in the future. And put in more frank terms, I think Mr. Dewey is advocating for making learning interesting whenever we can to overcome the inevitable dull bits. And in this context, meaning the transmission of kind of social emotional skills in an exciting format to make it fun, so when they're actually challenged, they're able to kind of draw upon those skills and feel like the entire experience is positive rather like they're being forced to learn something. So the beauty of adventure therapy is flexibility. So adventure therapy isn't a single methodological style, but more of a framework for delivering counseling interventions. So for those who have had some exposure to kind of education interventions, adventure therapy is kind of analogous to positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS, in that adventure therapy is more of a framework for intervention delivery rather than a modality of counseling. So adventure therapy doesn't operate exclusively as a psychodynamic approach, cognitive behavioral therapy approach, or humanistic approach, but can draw from any of those areas depending on the comfort of the therapist with them, and then apply them in the framework of active construction that John Dewey was talking about. So adventure therapy assesses clients' needs and kind of meets them where they are by being intentional in matching the activities and other clients to the client. For example, when working with clients with maybe an emotional behavioral disorder, picking a setting and activity that require team building with the intention of evoking situations that bring out interpersonal challenges between the participants can be used to kind of elicit learning opportunities that can be addressed as they come up in real time. Alternatively, a student with anxiety or depression might benefit from extended group hiking with opportunities for mindfulness, skill development, and reflection. So the therapeutic technique kind of works hand in hand with the therapeutic setting. And adventure therapy traditionally involves a group component. So one of the benefits of this method is that in a challenging group environment, clients' natural interactions are more apparent than they would be in a structured therapy setting, especially a one-on-one therapy setting where it's just the client and the adult. So when you have these group settings, making in-the-moment counseling is possible in a way that's difficult to achieve in the more contrived settings. So to give a real-life example, I was co-facilitating a small group adventure therapy class, and we had just gone on a strenuous bike ride through a major city to a public pool, and the group was comprised of 6 or 7 12-year-old boys with a range of kind of social, emotional, and behavioral goals. And while we were at the pool, tempers flared up when one of the boys mocked another kid's water goggles, and the boy who had been made fun of happened to be holding a milkshake at the time, which he elected to use as a projectile and flung at the boy who had been making fun of him, effectively dousing that kid in chocolate milkshake along with myself and several unsuspecting pool goers who were not thrilled. And that's kind of the beauty of adventure therapy. It gives you the opportunity to intervene on these sticky situations and kind of tackle them as they happen in real time and be able to provide guidance and intervention in the moment. So adventure therapy slowly gained momentum in the 1970s, and in 1974, a company called Vision Quest became the first outdoor program to receive accreditation from the Joint Commission on Accreditation from Hospitals. And this was a huge leap forward for Vision Quest and the field of adventure therapy in general, because it allowed for billing of health insurance rather than relying on public funds or private money. So Vision Quest worked with juvenile delinquents and did month-long excursions in extremely harsh conditions in the deserts of Arizona and California. And research on AT is kind of scarce and oftentimes murky because it's difficult to say conclusively if the therapeutic results are due to just the counseling techniques that are being used or if they're specific to the AT setting. But in this case, researchers compared 90 male graduates of the Vision Quest program with 257 juvenile delinquents who had been placed in other probation programs and found that Vision Quest graduates had fewer arrests than their counterparts did. But adventure therapy and specifically Vision Quest have very checkered pasts. For example, in 1978, the Arizona Department of Economic Security had received 127 allegations of wrongdoing related to Vision Quest, and in 1995, Vision Quest was identified as having 16 deaths, some of whom were staff that were associated with the program. 9 of the deaths occurred in one sailing incident. According to a 60 Minutes report, Vision Quest was never cited for negligence, but did say that the vessel wasn't inspected and that it was run by an inexperienced crew. Another for adventure therapy was the creation of the Outdoor Behavioral Healthcare Council in 1996. So this was a coalition that aimed to kind of bring standards to wilderness therapy and outdoor treatment programs and ensure the safety and therapeutic rigor of the programs in their accrediting body. And while adventure therapy would still be regarded as kind of a newcomer to the world of psychology and counseling and a relatively niche area, its popularity and visibility have steadily increased since the 1980s, So this is a graph just showing the number of times adventure therapy has been cited in published books available in a Google database. And that is it. That is a brief introduction to adventure therapy. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.